next speaker is Dr. Cheryl Anderson, and she's the director of the Hazards, Climate and Environment Program at the University of Hawaii's Social Science Research Institute, and she's also a certified urban regional planner. For the last 16 years, she has conducted research and planning projects on climate and disaster risk management in the Pacific and Southeast Asia, with attention to gender and traditional ecological knowledge aspects of risk reduction. Dr. Anderson?
Aloha kako. I wanted to talk a little bit about some of the emerging aspects of the gender research that we've been doing for the last number of years. And it's focusing more on women's particular ways of knowing how to do things. We understand some of the gender differences in looking at risk management and then now adaptation to climate change issues. But a lot of the specific knowledge that women bring has not been brought into discussions as much. So I'd like to focus attention a little bit more in that area. One of the things about the Pacific, as you can see from this opening slide, is that this is a very, very diverse region. We have these small island atolls, very small, and then big islands that are much more urbanized. So we run the gamut of very rural to very urbanized populations, living in small places, but they're all connected by ocean, and they're all have similar needs and similar issues dealing with coastal environments, dealing with island environments. Make everything in the ocean and everything about the communities that are dealing with resource management, all of these issues have attention to the fact that we're all living in ocean coastal communities. And as such, extreme climate events or issues of climate variability have a really strong implication in what goes on in these island communities. You can see here pictures of the normal conditions in the oceans with the thermal climb and the warming, and then pictures during El Nino Southern Oscillation periods, where the warm water extends across the ocean. And what happens when the warm water moves across the ocean like this is you get an increased likelihood that there could be storm risks in islands that are further over to the east than previously happened, because the storms generate over warm water bodies. You get increased, if you see the little bumps on the top of the ocean there, as the ocean warms up, it also expands, there's thermal expansion, and so you're going to get changes in sea level, even though it's not the long-term signal of sea level rise. Just in a period of El Nino, you're going to get changes from El Nino to La Nina of maybe a meter's change on a shoreline in some of these island areas. And so you can see that resources are going to be extremely affected by just changes in the climate variability. And now we add on the longer-term climate change signals, and that adds a huge increase in some of the impacts and the stresses that people are already dealing with. They're going to have to deal with even more so. In looking at the sectors that are impacted from climate in these communities, there are a number of them, and in each one of these areas there are very specific gender differences and issues. And I'm, in the interest of time, not going to go through all of these, but you can see water, fisheries, agriculture, energy, health, ecosystems, the economy, infrastructure, wastewater, society, and culture. And just a few of these are looking at agriculture and food security issues that we already, Yana just discussed. And it's a lot of very similar implications in the differences, and it depends on the food crops that people are used to dealing with, and focusing on a lot of the cultural impacts, because as these the climate variability, there's been a lot of flooding in near-shore areas. The taro crop, which is really important in a lot of the island communities, gets inundated with salt water and cannot grow. And so there's a huge implication and loss of food security. But that also goes to very important cultural foods. It has implications for ceremonies. And so you're seeing a stacking of effects that are happening related to culture and society just because of the loss in some of the food crops. A lot of what we know about the differential social impacts comes from disaster research that's gone on in the Pacific. And we know that these are going to be exacerbated by climate change. And it's particularly, the differential impacts are particularly seen in areas of gender, in effects on, as I said, the agriculture, the types of products or crops that people use. It has an effect on indigenous peoples, effects by age, class, wealth, and how much ability you have to recover, how vulnerable your social condition is before the disaster impacts, what resources you have available to you to be able to recover following the disaster. And again, with land resource and access, the immigrant and minority populations, and also issues for environmentally displaced persons. We already have seen when there is a disaster happening, when a very strong El Nino makes the living conditions on an island uninhabitable, the food security is gone, that people move to different islands until their island has been recovered. And that's been the historical patterns for hundreds of years. But at this point, there are some of these islands that are not recovering. So it's impossible for people to move back onto these very small atoll islands because there is no water, no freshwater lands, and no ability to be able to replant your crops if you're not going to have fresh water. So what we've begun to see is things like conflicts and violence starting to occur. It's very small, but over access to resources and resource issues as people begin to move across the Pacific. So we have incidences in Hawaii of people coming in and they don't understand what the fishing practices are, and they're using certain net fishing that is not suitable or not appropriate in Hawaii. And local communities are getting frustrated, and those are some of the small conflicts we're already starting to see. But if this is exacerbated as we move on in time, those could be potential very large conflict issues related to resources. One of the things that's very interesting about the Pacific is there's still a lot of the matrilineal land tenure systems that are in place. In a lot of the Micronesia islands especially, this is the case. And because the land is so small, you saw the atoll in the opening picture, because the land area is so small, that having access to land then is very empowering. And it sets up the power dynamics in the community where, in a lot of these places, men are involved with the ocean resource management, and women are involved in the land management, and they have a lot of power in their society, a lot of equality, because they control the land resources and who develops what, where, and makes those kinds of decisions. But as we're seeing impacts to land resources and to the impacts on food security, decreasing land area because of erosion, and any of these changes, that's going to decrease the amount of equality and power in the social dynamic between men and women in these societies, because they aren't going to have access to the land area that gives them their power in the situation. Some of the things, though, that we've seen have started to happen are, we look at this small island in the Marshall Islands. You can see there's a lot of coastal erosion in this area. But it's women's knowledge that's being used right now to start replanting efforts. There's a certain kind of tree called pandanus tree, and the root structure branches out, and it's able to grab rocks and hold sand and hold land. So as waves come in, strong waves come in, it's able to start grabbing and rebuilding back some of the land resource. And for a number of years during the colonization process, women's knowledge to be able to do this wasn't being looked at, but now that there's such severe land erosion, a lot of the women's knowledge is becoming more important to be able to deal with low-cost adaptation methods.